What's up, guys? Welcome to the third video in my React Native tutorial series here on youtube.com and patreon.com/programming. In this tutorial, we're going to talk a lot about React Native's sort of core component, perhaps the most important topic in React Native, which is state. So state in React Native is comprised of two things. It is comprised of a JavaScript object and a method, which can be invoked by a JavaScript. So the object that is state contains all of your internal data relevant to your component, specifically things that you plan to display in the component and things that can be updated and changed and or deleted. So for example, what I'm going to do here is in my constructor of this particular component, I am going to set an initial state of Josh. So name Josh. And as I said, this .state is comprised of an object and a method. The object is this .state. The method is this .setState. So I'm going to go ahead and remove these second two tags here, these two text tags. And as I explained before, if you want to execute JavaScript anywhere inside of JSX, you simply supply curly braces. And what I'm going to do is say this.state.name. And that's going to tell React Native that what I want in this text tag, as far as what is going to be shown, is whatever value is at this.state.name. And of course, inside this.state, we have a property of name with a value of Josh. Thus, Josh shows in the text. Moving on, you might be wondering, well, why didn't we set something like this, var state equals? That is because state is a predefined object inside of a React Native component. And since we are extending a React Native component with my first project, we already have state. Now, state can be any number of things. So name Josh, age 26, favorite color, and that can be red. And as long as we separate it by a comma, just like we would any other JavaScript object, we have absolutely no problems whatsoever. And what I'm going to go ahead and do here is throw another text in here, and I'll give it the same style as what there was originally, which was instructions. And inside this text component, I'm going to go ahead and display my age. Voila! So you can see I've got my name and my age on screen, and this data is coming from state. Now, what I'm going to do to orchestrate or to sort of show how state works is I'm going to make a call to the method this.setState. After a timeout of about 5 seconds so that you see what happens. And I'm going to execute this code in component did mount. If you remember from one of the last videos, I stated that component did mount is one of the lifecycle methods for components, and it is called automatically after the component finishes mounting. Alright, so just like any other JavaScript, we're going to do window.setTimeout, which will take a function and a time to wait. So after 5 seconds, I'm going to do, at this point we'll be inside the window object. So what I'm actually going to do is make a variable for this, var self equals this. If you know how that works, great. If you don't know how that works, don't worry about it just yet. We'll get to it. And I'm going to change age to 30. 33, why not? Now, I'm going to refresh, and after 5 seconds of waiting, you're going to see magic. All right, you see that the number changed for my age there. It went from 26 to 3. Now the reason that happened is we called the method setState. And what setState does is it takes an object of properties, it compares it to what the current state is, updates whatever is required, e.g. whatever has changed, and then makes another call to the render method. So the second time the render method is called, the age property of state has been changed to a value of 33. Thus, we see 33 here. Okay, so hopefully that made sense. And we're going to move on. And what I'm going to do to further demonstrate the power of state is we're going to make an app that uses the Facebook Login SDK. And what I'm going to have it do is after I click the login button, it's going to take some information from my profile, namely my email address, my name, and my profile picture. And what we'll do is we'll go ahead and show all of that stuff on screen. And it will be set in state. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set my initial state to what I actually need it to be, which would be an Facebook ID of 0, an image URL of just an empty string. We'll need an empty string for name and an empty string for email. And the reason we need these things is because we need the state to know that the initial value is nothing, but it still has to be there because our display code, which will be rendering that actual information, will say, hey, this.state.name doesn't exist if I don't actually give it a value. Okay, so what we're going to do first here is I'm actually going to go ahead and update the styles. You know what? No, we can leave it alone. I think it's fine, actually. Okay, so one of the great things about working with component state is that we have the option to decide what the render method is going to return based on values inside of state. And what I mean by that is if we have a Facebook ID of 0, then we're going to return the login button stuff, right? Otherwise, we might return all of the code that shows my name, my email address, all the stuff that I was just talking about previously. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So if this.state.fbid is directly equal to 0, we're going to return this JSX instead. And what we're going to return is a view with a style of styles.container. If you're still not completely comfortable with style, that's fine. It's a prop of just about every component, and we will get into more of how that works later. I'm also going to nest inside that view a login button, and the read permissions for that request are going to be public profile and email. So this login button stuff is complicated, and I know that you probably don't have the React Native Facebook SDK pre-installed and pre-configured during this tutorial, and I wanted to go through how to do all that, but I figured it would be best if we could focus on how state works before we worry about how to install custom plugins for React Native. Okay, so let's just worry about that for now. All right, so I actually do need to go ahead and import the code for the Facebook SDK, and I'm going to set a constant of Facebook SDK equals require React-Native-FB SDK, and from there I'm going to destructure the components that I actually need, which will be graph request manager, access token, and login button. Okay, so now that we've destructured those things from FBSDK, these things will actually work. Alright, so here's what I need to do now. I'm inside an event. A lot of React Native components have events, and in this case the event that I'm inside is onLoginFinished, which is automatically called by the Facebook SDK after the login button has been pressed and the operation that is required has been finished. The function that is passed in has two parameters, two arguments, error and result, which the first one is just going to give you the error, and the second one, surprise, gives you the result. So I'm going to handle the error and the result in separate ways, and I will do so now. If we don't have an error, then what we're going to go ahead and do is call accessToken.get current access token, which returns a promise object. Thus, we will call the .then. The return will be a function with a single parameter or argument of data. And with that data, we are going to make an information request. I get it. Okay, I know what you're thinking. None of this makes any sense, and that is totally fine. The point of this tutorial is not to teach you how to use the Facebook SDK, although there will be that. This tutorial is specifically to show you how component state changes the way that your app will work. Okay, so bear with me here. Okay. Maybe if I had pre-typed all this, I could have had it ready, but I didn't. We're going to do a new graph requests manager. All of this stuff is available to you on the React Native Facebook SDK website. And so if you want to try and follow along, that's totally fine. You know, who am I to tell you no? Okay, so a little debugging. As you can see, and as you've known before, the red screen tells us that there's an error, and we have an unexpected token of comma, and we are expecting a right curly brace on line 37. Okay, now typically what that will mean is that there's a semicolon somewhere that there doesn't necessarily need to be a semicolon. It doesn't always mean that there's a comma there and that we actually do need something else. In fact, it almost never means that, to be honest with you. Oh, okay. So, sorry it took so long. The problem was that the function being passed on all log of result, I did not specify that as a fat arrow function. If you don't know what a fat arrow function is, that is some beautiful ES6. I think it's lovely, and all it really does is mean I don't have to type the word function. Okay, so ignoring what all of this actually does, we have set up the basic layout, and what it does is if the Facebook ID in state is directly equal to 0, then we're going to display this fancy button here. Okay. Now, let's set it up on what to do if there is not a if there is a Facebook ID specified. Then we will make an image with a width of 50 and a height of 50. Just a little thumbnail for our ID. We're going to go URI will be this.state.image URL, and this is of course when it's actually set. Right now it's not, so we won't see this screen. This.state.fbid. This information is totally not anything that's super sensitive, so it's not like I'm not worried about you guys having my the email address I use for Facebook or like my Facebook ID or anything. If you're gonna stalk me, that's totally cool. I'm fine with that. It wouldn't be the first time, probably, or I don't know, maybe it would be. Anyways, in my call to new graph request, I did state that I was going to provide a callback function, which was response info callback. So I probably should do that, and I will go ahead and specify that now. This particular function I actually stole from the Facebook SDK help. So, I'm just kind of copying it right now. If error, we'll just console log the error. There's really nothing more that we need to do because this is just so self-explanatory. Okay, here's the magic. Okay, what we're doing is if we're saying in response callback or response info callback, if there's no error, then we're going to set state. Okay, and the state that we are going to set will be fbid equals result.id. And that field ID is in the result object that is returned by the Facebook SDK. Once again, I'm well aware that this probably doesn't make any sense where these values are coming from, but the idea here is to demonstrate how state works and not to demonstrate how how the Facebook SDK login works. Okay, we're going to specify image URL to be a result.picture.data.url. The name will be result.name, and finally email will be result.email. Okay. Now, What this means is when we click login, okay, and we authorize the app and all that, this is all stuff that you'll have to figure out how to do later, or I will make a video on it. You have to register an app with Facebook, get an app ID, set that into your project in Xcode and stuff like that, which is why you can't really follow along right now. But anyways, once we approve the app, login will finish, and public profile and email will be passed back to this function. At that point, we will make a call to get current access token, and the reason for that is that we need specific permissions from the Facebook server to take information, which will be picture, email, and name. Really quickly, the reason I'm not saying picture or name when I do read permissions is realistically, I really don't need to specify both of these. I really just need to say, look, I'm looking for some permissions. However, public profile doesn't necessarily generate an access token, so email does. Okay, so the reason I've got email is so I can get an access token, so I can then make another request to the Graph API, which will return to this callback function with a result, okay, which you see here. If there's no error, then I'm going to go ahead and set state with these values. So let's try it out. Continue with Facebook. I've already authorized my first project because this isn't my first time running this. So I'm going to click OK. And what's going to happen is we are going to have an issue where it says can't find variable image. All that means is that I forgot to import image into React Native. So I'm going to go ahead and fix that and refresh the app and log back out. And we're going to do this again. Continue with Facebook, click OK, and bah, look, there's me. Hey, that's me. Okay, there's my Facebook ID, my name, and my email. The reason I'm not going to, cut that part out where I had the error is because errors like that happen all the time, and it's important for you to know that if you have something like that, you more than likely forgot to add that into your destructuring when you were importing all of your components from React Native. So that's that. What happened once again was that I logged in. I requested some permissions, they came back, and when they came back, I set state. So render was called a second time. The first time being when you saw the button. It was called a second time, and this time, FBID was not 0. So it displayed this image and a couple of text things based on data stored in state. So the gist of this whole thing is if you change state using the set state method, render will be called again. I only want to touch on one last thing, okay? This right here, saying this.state equals, is totally fine in the constructor one time. But you never set state, you never change the state object using this.state equals at any other point. Otherwise, you're just going to screw everything up. And the reason for that is using the set state method compares the differences in what state is and changes only the things that needed to be changed. Okay, which is why earlier when I changed my age, my name stayed as Josh. If you use this.state equals, you will overwrite the object that is already there, and render will not be called again because the render is the last piece that's called at the bottom of set state. Okay, so never ever use this.state equals unless it's the very first time you're calling it and you're doing it to set your initial state. There's another way to do it, which is get initial state. Right, that's a method, and then all that does is return an object, in which case I could have said 0 and image URL, but I prefer to do it the constructor way, and you might like it the other way. That's totally up to you, but the app works, and I look forward to making the next video for you guys. I promise in our very next video, we are going to actually make a real app that you'll be able to follow along with and, code along with. And the app that we're going to make is a very simple phone contact book app. We're going to do something with, their first and last name, their address, email, and phone number. So I look forward to talking to you guys. And remember, if you like this video on YouTube, hit like, subscribe to my channel. If you'd like to be a supporter, go to patreon.com. That's patreon.com/programming and become a patron. And you'll get to do, some of my live tutorials where I'll be live, obviously, and you'll be able to talk to me through the chat directly, and I can answer your questions, without you having to wait until I get the time to get around to it. So, see you guys soon.